If you're a pop culture junkie who loves TV, film, music, comedy, and other really important stuff, then you've come to the right place. Get ready and settle in for Classic Conversations, the best pop culture interviews in the world. That's right, we circled the globe so you don't have to. If you're ready to be the king of the water cooler, then you're ready for Classic Conversations with your host, Jeff Dwoskin.
All right, Molly, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. You get the show going each and every week, and this week was no exception. Welcome, everybody, to episode 220 of Classic Conversations. As always, I am your host, Jeff Dwoskin. Great to have you back for what's sure to be one of the classicest conversations of all time. We're talking tech, past, now, future. Oh, it's all coming together with Tom Merritt. Tom is an award-winning independent tech podcaster, host of the Daily Tech News Show. You likely got all your tech news from him on CNET back in the day, and he's here to share a ton of great stories and talk about all the amazing things he does. If you're a creator, get ready to be inspired by Tom Merritt. That's coming up in just a few seconds. And in these few seconds, I want to remind everyone of episode 218. If you haven't listened yet, make that your thing to do after hearing this conversation. 218 with Greg Cope White, author of The Pink Marine, an amazing story of his time in Marine boot camp when being out wasn't in. Do not miss that amazing conversation. But right now, let's turn our attentions to Tom Merritt. We're going to geek out a bit, go back in time. Early 2000s, talk tech, work our way up. A lot of great insights and stories from Tom Merritt. Enjoy. All right, everyone, I'm excited to introduce you to my next guest, tech journalist, award-winning podcaster, YouTube video creator, helped build CNET TV, launched Buzz Out Loud, currently in his 10th year at Daily Tech News Show. Please welcome Tom Merritt. How are you, Tom?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Tom, it's so great to have you on the show. I remember watching you on CNET and like thinking, oh, this is the greatest show ever. It's like talk soup for tech.
Yeah. No, we kind of referred to it the same way. I'm glad that came through.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was just like, I was trying to think like what could I do to kick off to possibly try and impress? Not impress, but like.
Too kind.
So, but like, let me throw this out there and let me know if you're like, I'm going to go for in my basement, pretty much perfect condition. I have a box, and in that box is the original oldest photo styler, page maker, and freehand. Sitting next, nice. Right, and sitting next to it is a WebTrends professional suite. I also have SideQuest drives and zip drives in my basement with many, many great things on there that I will never see again. But that was...
Yep. Yeah, I have plastic bins in that closet over there with similar types of items. You know, I used to joke I have every computer I ever owned. I don't think it's true anymore, but I've got my TI 99 behind me. I've got a copy of Windows 95 on CD down there. So yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I think we're exactly the same age almost. And so I have the same thing. I grew up on the TI 99. I remember vividly going and buying that. I think Bill Cosby was like the celebrity that was pushing TI 99.
Yeah.
I remember getting magazines and spending hours typing in the code to get some crazy game just to go.
I still have the beginner's basic and user's reference guide from the TI on the bookshelf behind me. So I never forget where I came from.
There'll be nothing that you say past this point that'll impress me more than this exact moment.
That's great.
But the greatest part was backing up on a cassette drive. I mean, it was just like that. Those were the days.
Yeah, that sound, right? When you're playing, when you're loading in a program, and it's if anybody knows the old modem sound, it's similar, right? It's that jangly, noisy sound. That always takes me back.
It's crazy to think like how excited I was when zip drives came out, and you're like, oh my god, 100 meg on one thing, and I was like, oh man, can you believe it?
And or the first time you got 100 megahertz Pentium, you're like, Why would I need all this speed out of a processor?
So I was a graphic designer out of college. And one of the things I bought, well, when I was in college, I spent a lot of my bar mitzvah money on a computer and a hand scanner, where you had to do the little marks and you could have to put it all together. And it was so ahead of its time at the time that the marketing teacher that I had for an advertising class accused me of cheating because he couldn't, because nobody had this. You know what I mean? Nobody,
Right.
No college kid was going and spending like $1,800 on the computer, right? And then whatever on that. And then I remember spending almost that much on my first color flatbed scanner, the same one you could walk into Office Max or Home Depot right now get for $30, $1,800 daisy chained into my Mac, like with cylinders. I can't remember, like tubes that you had to replace. I remember my hands shaking when I would replace them.
Do you remember parking hard drives? You used to have to park the hard drive before you moved the computer because otherwise you could, you had to like switch it to a certain mode. And then, I was like, wait, did I remember to park the hard drive? I need to move. My fondest memory was spending all day on with tech support and realizing I had just not pushed the power cord all the way in enough. I've been there. Yeah. But the daisy chaining back in the days when if it wasn't in the right order, I had the Mac that had, you could talk to it, but I could never talk to, you know how you have to talk normal to these things that understand. Oh, voice. Right. And so it was horrible. I had a Windows, like third-party software that you could talk to Windows 3.1, but it was like a limited vocabulary. So you could say launch program manager or next or enter. It worked, but you had to train it with your own voice, and it only did like dozen things. But it impressed the heck out of other people. It was not terribly practical, though. Oh, man. So those are the good old days. So, so I remember that. And then I wanted to, before we jump into like your illustrious tech career, there was just something on Wikipedia that popped out that your dad helped develop Coffee Mate. Yes, he did. He was a food scientist for pet milk. He helped create one of the greatest inventions of all time. I mean, why you got to get your dad's name on your Wikipedia page? It just says born to a food scientist father. Yeah. Okay. My dad is Bill Merritt. If anyone would like to cite this show as your source, because, you know, Wikipedia frowns on you going in and editing your own things. So there's, my hands are tied, but yeah, those Wikipedia articles are weird. They're kind of good for impressing friends and family that you have a Wikipedia article made about you and that it has survived, the purges when they get rid of irrelevant stuff. So, crossing my fingers for preventing the day that they go like, yeah, this guy, he doesn't matter anymore. Get rid of his article. But they're not particularly comprehensive, are they? No, but they're good at like basic outlines. And sometimes they have gems like Tom's dad invented Coffee Mate. He worked on a team, of course, as always with those things. But he used to bring home all kinds of experimental food that he would ask us to eat and give him feedback on, like ice cream and apple soda. And he worked on old El Paso stuff. So we always had hot sauces kicking around. I just thought that was normal growing up, but it was unusual, the kinds of experimental foods we ate. That's amazing. Anyway, I wanted to give your dad due. And now I can add it as a site once we go live. Yeah, thanks. All right. How did you get into like just being tech obsessed, and what's the path to CNET? Let's get to there, and we can talk about CNET specific, but what got you there? Sure. So, I'll try to keep it short, but my beginning interest in tech was with that TI-99 4A. I had desperately wanted an Atari 2600, had saved up my allowance till I had the $99 it cost. I was ready to not have to go over to Jonathan Pennington's house to play Atari. I was going to have my own. And we went into a Kmart, and my dad, Bill Merritt, famous food scientist, as I'm going up to the shelf to get the Atari, says, listen, you can get the Atari. You've got the money. It's your money to spend. You spend it how you want. But if you want, I will give you the extra $99 to buy the TI-99 4A, your choice. And it was just like, he had not prepared me for that. in that moment, I was just crushed because I'm like, but then I won't have the Atari. But I went through the rationalization of like, well, the TI-99 has games too, so I can still play games, but I could do a whole lot more. So I took the matching funds from my dad, got the TI, and very much did not regret that choice. Learned to program in BASIC, got into tech. And then to fast forward, eventually got a Commodore 64, moved on to Windows, was doing my own websites in 96, just out of my house. And then that led to me being able to swing a job at ZDTV in San Francisco in 1999. I worked there through it changing its name to Tech TV. And then when it moved down to Los Angeles and merged in with G4 in 2004, some of the people I had worked with there were working at CNET and offered me a job over there. So that's how I ended up at CNET.
Amazing. We have a similar Atari 2600 story. So I interviewed Howard Scott Warshaw. He developed
cool.
Yar's Revenge and E.T. and Raiders. And I told him the same story. I was like, I saved up all my money and I went, I bought it, I figured out tax and I went in fully prepared, and it was crazy. In my background, I had a web development company that we sold to a company called US Web.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
I remember, because I had a graphic design background, walking into one of the bookstores, say Barnes and Noble. And there were 2 HTML books. And I remember picking one up because a friend of mine was really into the web. I wanted to impress him. So I did that. I had Corel Draw, which you could make GIFs. Right? It was the only thing that could really make GIFs at the time that I knew of, or GIFs. We could argue about that later.
Yeah. I just alternate pronunciations.
And now you can go to you can go to school, you can get entire degrees on that stuff. But back then it was all.
I taught myself HTML with a book. I worked at Half Price Books in Austin, Texas at the time, but I used a book and then just view source code, right, in Netscape. That's how you learned back then.
All right, good times. So, all right, so that's awesome. So, all right, so you're at CNET, and then you become a big TV star, right? You had Buzz Out Loud, which I'm fascinated about because Buzz Out Loud is an indefinite length podcast, but this is back in like 2004?
2005, March 30th, 2005 is when it started, yeah.
What was podcasting? I mean, I watched a video and it seemed like you were in a studio and you had all the equipment thanks to CNET, I'm guessing. But like podcasting back then versus, I mean, now it's like the barrier to entry is much lower, right? To be able to podcast now. It seems like podcasting is still in its infancy now, even though there are people like you that have been doing it for over 10 years. And so how has podcasting evolved? How have you seen like doing those shows versus now where you have 50 shows? I'm exaggerating, but where you're juggling so much, which we'll get into. What was it like podcasting back then versus now? And
I remember when Adam Curry's source code was out and people were buzzing about that. And I had just started at CNET. And so I started advocating for let's do a podcast. A couple other people had been advocating as well. My boss, eventual boss, I don't think he was my boss then, but Mark Larkin, who eventually ran CNET TV, and James Kim. All of us were saying we should do podcasts. And of course, when you're in a big company like that, the wheels turn slowly. So even though we were saying we should do a podcast in the autumn of 2004, it took until 2005 to get going. But one of the advantages we had was CNET had at one point run a radio station. So there was this fully outfitted studio with microphones and a mixing board all set up and ready to go for us. The interesting thing is that podcasting in 2004, 2005 was still very accessible. All you needed was a mic and a computer and knowledge. The barrier to entry was the work you would have to do, creating your own RSS feed files, finding a place to host them, all of that. But any computer with a microphone could record a podcast. What we ran into was we had great equipment, right? We could sound better than anybody else. And we had a nice, comfy, soundproof room to do it in, but it was set up for radio. So it had this horrible piece of software, and I'm blanking on the name now, that was designed for radio, but you had to jump through all these hoops to get it to just put out an MP3 file. And it also recorded things in a way that if the software crashed in the middle, you just lost the file. It was just gone. There was no backing it up. So we had, some hoops to jump through at CNET in that way. And I remember going rogue a few times and saying, well, we should really just be doing it the way that everybody else who's podcasting is doing it, like make it simpler. But the fun part about it was there were no rules. You could just sit down and record your show, and there was no expectation In fact, if there was an expectation back then, it was more that it was about music than it was about talk, because a lot of the early shows, even though Adam Curry was doing talk, were around music, like Coverville, Brian Ibbott's early show. So we were able to stand out really easily by just doing a professionally sounding, backed by CNET, a big name, quick at the beginning, 10 minutes once a week, which eventually became 40 minutes every day, which, as you mentioned, became indeterminate length because we just wildly varied.
Sorry to interrupt all the secrets of early podcasting, but I have to take a quick break. I want to thank you for all your support of the sponsors. When you support the sponsors, you're supporting us here at Classic Conversations, and that's how we keep the lights on. And now back to my incredible conversation with Tom Merritt. We're going to go a little bit into his radio background. And we're back. You mentioned it was a radio scenario, but you got your start, an early start.
Yeah, I did. I started working at WGEL, the best country in the country, in Greenville, Illinois, in 1986, because my mom was an aerobics instructor, and the wife of the station owner was in her aerobics class.
So had you dreamed of being a DJ? It seems like that was an interesting pivot to what eventually became the basis of your career that you're still doing today, talking into a microphone.
Yeah. I always loved listening to radio and listening to DJs. And, growing up in the St. Louis area, KMOX is legendary as one of those big 50,000 watt broadcasters with all the authoritative voices. So, yeah, I was very much into getting a job at a radio station. And so I started working 6 to 8 p.m. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday as a 16-year-old.
Do you have a radio voice? Did you have a radio voice back then? This is Tom Merritt.
No, do you want to hear my radio voice? I actually, let's see if I can pull it up real quick. I have a short recording of the first time I was ever on radio, and I've got an accent. I've sound 16. It's pretty ridiculous. Here, you want me to play it?
Sure.
Thank you. This is only my first day, and listen to that applause. All right. Tom Merritt here with you on WGEL, the best country in the country.
First time out, it sounded a little bit like it was a question, but yeah.
Am I supposed to be here? They're letting me do this?
Oh, that's amazing. It's hilarious that you have it too. That's great.
I have it on cassette, and at some point along the way, I digitized it in, and someone wanted to hear it, so I put it on this soundboard.
So you're doing the CNET show, and then, nowadays, you do a daily show now, but back then, was it curating the information for all this tech news? What's the diff between now?
Yeah, right.
And then?
It's interesting what is the same and what was different. Gathering the news for Buzz Out Loud kind of borrowed skills I had acquired at Tech TV. One of my first jobs at Tech TV because I was a web guy at Tech TV when I started, was writing up an article for the web about what they called the Top Talk. It was the first thing they talked about at the top of the show, the screensavers. So Leo and Kate, the hosts at the time, would come out. They'd talk about this one news story. So it was my job to suggest what that news story would be. I'd bring it into the production meeting, and cultivating those sources, which were, back in that time, ZDNet, Slashdot, eWeek, places like that, kind of built up that ability to know how to scan around for important stories. And so when we started doing Buzz Out Loud, that's really what we did. I would go and I would grab a bunch of links, not all of them from CNET, and then send them by email to Molly Wood, my co-host and co-creator of Buzz Out Loud. Then we would meet in one of our offices and then go through which ones we wanted to talk about. And that was it. It was just an email.
And then today it's a whole different world.
Yeah, no, now for Daily Tech News Show, which is essentially the same idea as Buzz Out Loud 20 years later, it's going through Feedly. I use Feedly for RSS. I look at Google News to see what their algorithm thinks is important. I look at TechMeme. I look at our own subreddit where our fans will vote on what they think is important. And then you kind of triangulate all of that. We use Google Sheets to figure out what we're actually going to have in the show. And we can all be on the same page and collaborate from different parts of the world. And the sources the actual choosing of the stuff isn't that different. It's different sources than it used to be, but it's looking over and saying, what's everybody talking about? Let's identify how useful that is and talk about it in a way that helps our listeners feel a little smarter and understand things better.
And it's digestible. It's a quick 30 minutes, but we'll get to that. We're still on your journey.
Yeah. I don't want to jump ahead.
Yeah, no, but it's good. I like bouncing is good, and then keeps
good.
people interested. All right, so you left Buzz Out Loud on May 14th, 2010. It was celebrated by all of your folks in episode 1228. They had a Tom Merritt Love Fest. How was it emotionally and just kind of making that switch and leaving CNET to get ready to go to Twit?
Yeah, we had a unique situation with Buzz Out Loud, and it was a situation that was similar to what we had at Tech TV with that audience that I didn't think would be replicated. But even today, people who listened to Buzz Out Loud back then throw catchphrases at us like, well, actually, or talk about Buzztown, which is what we called the folks in the audience. So leaving them was very hard. The reason I left was because I wanted to branch out and do other shows. And I was doing other shows. I'd already started Sword and Laser with Veronica Belmont. I was doing Current Geek with Scott Johnson. But CNET, which by that time was owned by CBS, was just very, very bureaucratic about that sort of thing. So I wanted the independence to not have to shuffle a bunch of paperwork and get an approval from somebody who was a lawyer who didn't really understand what I was doing every time I wanted to make a move. And so moving to Leo Laporte's Twit network, he agreed to say, yeah, you do what you do for me, and then you can do whatever you want outside. So my hope was that we could move the audience with me, that folks would still follow. My initial hope was that Molly would have gone with me over there, which would have been great. Then we all would have had a new home. Unfortunately, that part didn't work out. But yeah, it was bittersweet because I got the independence I wanted, and I got a chance to start something fresh, which was exciting. But I had to close that chapter, which is something that will never be like that again, I don't think.
Yeah, it seemed like it was a good crew. It seemed like they really missed you. They even did a top 5 segment. Hair and fashion tips.
Oh my gosh, I had forgotten all about this episode.
Yeah, the top 5. Number 5, hair and fashion tips. Obscure references. The Dennis Miller of tech. That's right. Geeky how-to, bad puns.
Mm-hmm.
Anglophile was a runner-up, and bathroom reporting from CES, Hawaiian radio, lame prizes, and always playing devil's advocate. These were the things that your co-workers on Buzz Out Loud were going to miss the most. Segways was a big topic too, and that goodbye, your segways.
I think bad puns is still there. Devil's advocate is still there. I hope the segways are still as good as they used to be.
Segways are key for...
yeah.
Speaking of which... All right, so now you're doing Tech News Today, which is on kind of taking that format. You've reinvented the format along the way, or readapted it to yourself in your new homes. So still the grind. What goes into any of these? I mean, how long does it take to produce 30 minutes of any one of these? Or, I know the new shows are about 30.
Yeah.
Like, how long does it take? Like to the process you were mentioning earlier, where we were talking about kind of just diving in and finding the stuff, but fine tuning it. How much of it do you script? How much of it do you just go, all right, this is what I basically know we're going to talk about, and then I'll just kind of deliver those things?
I don't know. It's hard to put a firm number on it. Every day I get up and look at my RSS feeds and mark stories for inclusion. And I wake up 6 or 7 a.m. That's kind of one of the things I do while I drink my coffee and eat my breakfast. Then I go do some other things. But 9 a.m. is when we hit the ground running. And we actually have developed a fairly routine schedule. From 9 to 10, we're nailing down what's going to be in the show. We use Discord to talk to each other. From 10 to 11, it's writing the setups. So we don't write the entire show. We want to have discussions that are open, but we write the setup just to make sure we get the numbers right and the facts right and all of that sort of thing. And that exists as show notes that people can refer to as well. 11 to 12 is proofreading all of that, double checking everything's in there, any late breaking stories that happen. Then at 12 o'clock, we do a quick Discord audio production meeting to just go over the show, grab some lunch. And then at 12:45, we're in StreamYard getting ready to do the show, doing mic checks. From 1 to 1:30, we do Daily Tech News Show. From 1:30 to 2, we record Good Day Internet, which is the extended show that patrons get. And then from 2, we go off the stream at 2, and we do kind of a post-show wrap-up, talk about any notes or anything. Joe, our video producer, does all the publishing. And by 2:30, 3 o'clock, everything's wrapped up, and we get up the next morning and do it all again.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
To do every single day. But I mean, I guess nowadays with Elon Musk, you probably don't have to worry too much about there being news.
If anything, we have to worry about over-covering Elon Musk. That's one of the things we try to do, is not feed the outrage machine. So with Elon, it gets tricky because especially there for a couple months, he was just spouting off, and we're like, well, not everything he says is news, right? But
everything he hears, he believes is news.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the AI revolution?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The ChatGPT stuff particularly is, I think, pivotal, not because ChatGPT is even that great of a tool, relatively speaking, to what GPT and other models are capable of, but because it caught that public imagination. It was that moment where everybody started talking about something, started playing around with it, finding things to use it for. And I know a couple of folks at OpenAI, and they were like, I mean, we didn't think that we've done public demos before and none of them got that attention. We didn't expect that one to be that much different from the others. Wait until you see GPT-4. And of course, Microsoft just recently said they're going to start putting GPT-4 into new stuff. That is multimodal. So it can do not just text, but you can write a text prompt and it can create a video or images or describe an image. I think this is going to be one of those things, like the internet, like smartphones, that we don't even know what it's going to be used for or what its effects are going to be really right now.
Yeah, I mean, GPT-4 is like 100 million times more than what we have now. It's interesting. I read one thing that the playground was around for a while, but it was that different interface that they created that everyone's used to. It's just a simple interface that helped it blow up. Because that's when, I think that when people say, oh, they blew up to 1 million, it was via that interface, like when they made it so simple to use.
Yeah, as a graphic designer, that must make you feel pretty good, right? Like UI, people, it's important.
I didn't want to oversell myself as a graphic designer. I started as a graphic designer to get into it. And then I became strategy and stuff when I realized I wasn't really that good at graphic design.
I wasn't that good at HTML. That's why I ended up talking for a living.
Right. Once I started the web company, we hired people who were actually good at that kind of stuff. It was like, then you start moving into some of the other things. But you have 1 million podcasts and shows that you do, and you go beyond tech. So you mentioned Sword and Laser. So let's just cover that one real quick. You do this with Veronica Belmont, right? And this is an online book club. Sci-fi, fantasy books. Reading books and stuff, that's a huge investment of time too. So where do you find? I feel like maybe you're using time travel, not telling anyone. So you've developed some kind of tech trick to make more than get more than 24 hours in a day. All right, so Sword and Laser, which sounds like you've been doing for over a decade also.
Yeah, 2007, I think. Yeah.
What sparked this passion? Because it's clearly an ongoing passion. When you talk about people just dropping pod fading after 7 episodes, here we are, years later. So, in that 320 plus episodes or so.
I'm a sci-fi nerd, probably my earliest sci-fi. Bill Merritt's getting a lot of shout outs in this episode. My dad and I would sit down on Sunday mornings and watch reruns of the original Star Trek before there were any other Star Treks that you could watch. That was it. Maybe the animated series, but it was because he was in the Navy. So he loved that naval aspect of it, and that sense that Gene Roddenberry, who was also in the Navy, brought to it. And we both liked space stuff. Then Hitchhiker's Guide came out, and Douglas Adams showed me the humor side of sci-fi. So I've been into sci-fi since a young age. And then Veronica, who was an intern and then producer of Buzz Out Loud at CNET, was into fantasy. So we would always compare notes. She would tell me about, whatever novel with dragons she had been reading, and I would tell her all the spaceship novels that I was reading. And at some point we decided, we should start a podcast about this, about the conversations we have where we expose each other to the other side of the conversations or the other side of the genre. I don't know how it ended up starting as a book club online first. I know we heard Leo Laporte talking about somebody should start an online book club, and that kind of gave us a nudge as well. We started it on Ning, which is no longer around. as just an online forum with the intention of starting the podcast, which we started a couple months later. But it was basically those conversations we were having about the different sides of the genre. And I really wish I still had this email. We sent an email back and forth with each other trying names. And the last one was just a bunch of names that sounded like pubs. And Sword and Laser was one of those. And that's how we got that name. We just love doing it. There have been a few times over the years when one or the other of us is like, I'm not sure if we have enough time. Let's talk about it. But we've always found a way to keep it going just because we enjoy talking to each other about it. We have a great community that pitches in and talks about the books with us now on Discord. We're still on Goodreads as well. It's too much fun to not do.
That's the hardest part about being creative is when you put something in motion.
Yeah.
Like I was surprised, like when I would be clicking on the links of some of your podcasts and then find ones that maybe didn't exist anymore. I was like, ooh, this must have been very painful. What do I got here? We got A Damn Fine Podcast, which you covered the Twin Peaks show.
That had a built-in expiration date because we were catching up on old Twin Peaks, timing it when the new one came out on Showtime.
But let's talk about Star Wars. I wore my Star Wars shirt. You came out.
Oh, nice.
That one, I know you're covering it in Cord Killers, with Mandalorian and stuff like that. There's so much stuff you do. I just, do you talk, do you speak and go, here's how to be a content creator and create 50 things at the same time.
Yeah. The joke that one of my friends, Justin Robert Young, makes is that, first of all, I never go a day without a new podcast idea. I don't execute on all of them, of course. But also when I left Twit and started Daily Tech News Show, at one point I wasn't sure what I was going to be doing next. And I said, I don't know, maybe it won't be daily. And he just laughed. He's like, no, you will always maximize your schedule. So, and the reason that some of those shows, most recent of which being Let's Talk About Star Wars, go away is just time. And as I've been doing this, I've been getting better about accurately estimating what I'm capable of. And as I get older, I'm capable of less than I used to. So it was just one of those things where I'm like, you know what? It was great when it started. It's still great, but at some point you have to draw a line on stuff. So things like Forecast and Current Geek and Let's Talk About Star Wars and FSL Tonight, those are ones that fell on the other side of the line, unfortunately. Not that I didn't enjoy doing those too.
But so much still, Tom Merritt, to enjoy currently. So, all right, Cord Killers. So I love this one. I do a live show with my friends. So we call it Crossing the Streams. We talk about just stuff you should be binge watching. So we
that's great. Yeah.
Came from the pandemic and it was a great way just to connect with friends. And we would just talk about things we would talk about anyway. All right. So Cord Killers. This is great. What I love about this is it's kind of short. They're like short bursts. And then it seems like you just love to be able to kind of tackle every kind of aspect of everything you enjoy.
Yeah, that's one of the answers to how do you do all this is I've taken things that I would enjoy doing anyway and figured out how to turn them into a show. I love talking to Brian Brushwood, my co-host on Cord Killers. It gives us a chance to talk to each other every week about stuff we would talk about anyway, which is kind of the inception of that show. I'm going to be watching TV shows and movies. I'm going to be tracking those TV shows and movies. And the technology portion of it, I'm going to be covering for Daily Tech News Show anyway. So we just kind of put that all together into Cord Killers.
For Daily Tech News, so it's your 10th year. It's your 10th anniversary, which is...
Thank you.
So do anything special for the 10th? What do you got planned? Anything special or?
Yeah. This is our 10th year. So we've done it for 9 years. We've completed 9 years. So our 10th anniversary will be at the end of this year, actually at the very beginning of next year, January 2nd. And so what we decided to do was just spend the entire year celebrating that. We got some special art from Len Peralta to commemorate that. That's going out to our patrons through the Patreon merchandise. We're going to have another version of that come out next year that everybody can get. We've been doing a lot of work with the audience of like, what do you want? What do you like? We do that all the time anyway, but there's sort of a special urgency of like, okay, this is beginning of a new chapter at the end of this year. And not that we're relaunching the show or changing anything significantly, but really fine tuning it to say the tech show that was right for 10 years ago is not the same tech show that's right for now because we have different priorities. We have AI, we have automated cars on the horizon. We have Bitcoin and whether that actually is a thing or not, and NFTs. And all of that sort of thing. We have Mastodon. We have this whole craziness with Twitter. So the things that were popular 10 years ago were more about apps and smartphones. And there was more optimism, I think. Our mission on Daily Tech News Show is helping each other understand technology. So as we go through this 10th year, it's really figuring out how we adapt to help people understand technology now as it keeps changing.
How do you feel about Elon Musk and the $42,000 APIs? And
yeah, I don't claim to understand what he's doing with Twitter. I've made my best guesses at multiple times and then I've been proven wrong. I'm very confused with why he wanted to buy it in the first place and what his plan is now that he was forced to buy it. It was pretty clear he had regrets and didn't want to buy it, but I don't think that he's just trying to run it into the ground. Some people think, oh, he's just mad and so he wants to kill it. I don't think it's that. I think this really is him. I think he had more experience in the kind of companies he's run before, like SpaceX and Tesla, than he does in a social media ad-driven company. I think that's showing. I think with the API thing specifically, he's very much an on-paper kind of decision maker, and I'm not going to soft code the effects. So what he's doing makes perfect sense. They need to cut costs. Having an API that's freely available may not have been boosting Twitter as much as previous administrations of Twitter had hoped. So it may make perfect sense on paper to say, like, you know what, we can't afford to float that anymore. Let's change it. There's a way to change that keeps more developers on board. And there's the way Elon Musk did it, which is just pull the plug and then pick up the pieces afterward, which has been his management style this whole way along. I look forward for Twitter's sake to the day that he finally picks a lieutenant to take it over and he moves on to the next shiny thing that captures him, because I do think there's a lot of value in Twitter. I think every time people say Twitter is dying, that is overblown. However, there is a point at which he will beat it once too many times. And that isn't tomorrow, but he really does need to hand it over to somebody else. The positive side of all of this, in my opinion, is that it has opened the way for people to see what else is possible in that space. So Twitter is ceding ground that it dominated. You may or may not think it was doing very well at it, but it was really hard to get in and compete to do the same thing that Twitter does. And what Twitter does is very valuable, or it wouldn't still be around this long after it launched. But we're seeing not just Mastodon take off, but the idea of a decentralized short message blog system like Twitter take off. When you see folks like Medium launching a Mastodon server, when you get that story that Meta is considering creating at least an activity pub, which is the protocol, if not a Mastodon server that you log in with your Instagram. Blue Sky, which was spun out of Twitter by Jack Dorsey before Elon Musk came, has a very similar system. They think it's a better system than Activity Pub, but we'll see. On the other hand, Blue Sky could just start using ActivityPub at some time or interoperate with it. I think in the end, to me, it's more interesting what's going to arise now, given this new situation that we're in. And will Twitter interoperate with that, or will what arises supersede it? But I think we as users are going to get all the things we enjoyed out of Twitter, possibly with a lot of improvements.
all right, we can only hope.
That's a long way of saying I don't know. I know, but that's where my brain's pointed anyway.
Sorry to interrupt. Have to take a quick break. And we're back with Tom Merritt. I think another thing I dug up of interest while stumbling upon your dad's coffee mate is the Apple Foxconn plant in China. And
right. That's in the Wikipedia. Right.
Yeah. So what I thought was interesting about this is, so in 2012, there was a call for a boycott of Apple products in response to worker suicides and dangerous working conditions at the Foxconn plant in China. And then it talks about how you got them to kind of reconsider it and kind of refocus it in terms of where they should. What I thought was interesting about it, and I'd love to hear what it was like to be part of this, but is that the now, in the cycles that we have now, there seems to be no room for that, right? It's headline comes in, people react, and then that's it, right? And so there's no time for kind of thinking about things and rationalizing different outcomes and seeing, well, maybe there's a different way, than the knee-jerk reaction way. And so it was interesting as I read this. I was like, oh, this is of times past, but I thought it was a good thing to kind of bring up only because as a reminder that maybe, the knee-jerk reactions that we have these days, we need to all take a pause and look a little deeper.
Yeah, I don't know why that one's in the Wikipedia article. I don't even think it's the best example of a topic like that we've covered on various shows. Maybe because it was on Buzz Out Loud and not on one of the other shows. I also advocated and still advocate not over attributing the effect of the Cambridge Analytica stuff with Facebook. I think on Daily Tech News Show, because of the diversity of opinions amongst the contributors and yet our ability to all get along, even when we disagree, we have continued, and it has not been easy to navigate those waters of like, let's try to actually understand what's happening and not just get emotional about something and condemn it out of hand. So yeah, that Foxconn one was one where I'm like, hey, there's probably more going on here than meets the eye. Let's not just have a knee-jerk response. And I try to continue to do that. Even with the Elon Musk stuff, sometimes I'm like, well, what he's doing makes sense. You just heard me do it. Like what he's doing makes sense. It's the way he's doing it that may be the problem that gets people upset. It has not been easy though, man. Like I'll tell you that.
The world needs people to kind of stand up for different points, at least to keep people open-minded about different things and to take in different points of view. So keep fighting the good fight.
Hey, thanks.
Besides Cambridge Analytica, is there another great example?
That's probably the one that I take the most heat for. There's the constant, why are you over covering NFTs? Is one that I've gotten where there's a lot of backlash just against cryptocurrency in general and the culture around it. And people tend to pick a side and get tribal about it. So yeah, NFTs is a good example where I think that underlying technology is incredibly interesting and possibly very useful. I'm still looking for that use. And so sometimes when I cover something where I'm like, hey, this might be a really interesting use of NFTs, I get a lot of people who are upset. They're like, oh, you're promoting NFTs. I'm like, no, I'm not. Certainly not trying to sell you an NFT. And no, I don't think you should spend any money on NFTs yet, unless you want to. Like, I'm not here to judge, but I am looking for something that's very interesting about that technology to be put to good use.
Yes, I'm sure the blockchain technology has much better usage than just buying a meme.
Yeah, buying an ape. I mean, again, I also am like, hey, if you've got the money and that makes it fun for you, great. But don't see it as the future of the internet. That's all.
I always think, when I think about NFTs, I'm like, if you asked me to find a picture from my 2015 trip to Disney World on my phone, I wouldn't be able to find it. How am I supposed to find? You want me to pay $500 or $10,000 for a picture?
That's what it solves. It makes it easy to find that picture. I don't know. Yeah.
Not once you have a lot. To me, that's what I was. To me, have we not learned anything from just having a lot of photos on our phone that just digital, trying to find something?
There's that collector mentality, though, right? Like, I'm
a collector.
Yeah, me too.
I'm into vinyl. I'm into I used to be in the Simpsons toys. I love collecting. I get it.
Did you see that vinyl passed CD unit sales last year? Not just revenue.
I did, and I love vinyl. I just went to a record show a couple of weeks ago and stuff like that. I did see that headline and I laughed because I was like, well, nobody buys CDs anymore and people are buying vinyl.
Yeah, makes sense.
My daughter was going to a Post Malone. So she gets a ticket to the Post Malone and it came with the CD. And she gets it and she just looks at me and she's like, what am I supposed to do with this? She does. I don't know that my daughter's ever had a CD player. My computer, I don't know. My computer hasn't had one in forever. My car doesn't have one anymore. It's like good for vinyl. I think it speaks well, but it's like who can even play? I've got a thing of CDs in my basement that I was just like, thankfully at one point I converted them all over to digital.
Yeah. Here's what's going to happen though. Cassettes are getting popular now amongst the Gen Z crowd. So that's going to pass CDs. But then CDs are going to become nostalgic with Gen Alpha or whatever down the road, right? And then they're going to make a comeback.
Right. You got to, then you'll be able to go and buy like a CD player.
Yeah. Retro
they'll make
players.
the retro giant Walkman that you can just put your CDs in. You heard it here first, folks.
We called it.
And okay, so on top of all this, you're also an author. You've got at least 5 books that I'm aware of. And it was like Project Vera, Gallium, Pilot X. I said those in reverse, Trigger, and Bavaria. Where do you find the time, Tom? I'm still...
Yeah, the writing thing is just something, again, that I've always enjoyed. And I tried to figure out, well, how do I do this thing that I enjoy and turn it into something? I'm kind of at a crisis on my writing right now because the system that I had developed over the years has broken down for me a little. But it used to be that every year I would do National Novel Writing Month. Have you heard of that?
I haven't, but
okay, so
sounds great.
It's short version is you spend a month in November writing a certain amount of words a day in order to hit 50,000 words. And at the end of the month, have a book that you've written. First draft anyway, right? It's not completed, but first draft. So I've used that over the years. Every year in November, I do NaNoWriMo. I end up with 50,000 words and I spend the rest of the year kind of polishing it up, editing it, and getting it ready to go. Most of those books you mentioned are just self-published. They're something I put out on Kindle and print on demand. Pilot X and Trigger I did through a company called Inkshares, which actually acts like a regular publisher. It's crowdsources the pre-orders and then publishes them. So you can go to a regular bookstore and find those. But I have not, this is one of those things where I have not had the time to actually become a traditionally published author the way you would if you get an agent, publisher and all of that. So it's stayed kind of on the quasi hobby side of things. And I've got 4 novels sitting on my hard drive that I've sort of stalled on self-publishing and getting edited. And I do have a task every day to write or edit something, and I stick to that. I just have gotten behind in the publishing side of it.
I know now it's hard to get publishers.
Yeah, it is. And I'm sure I could. It's just that I've got, like you said, a million podcasts I've got to do too.
Not to mention A Word with Tom Merritt. We sit with the smartest and most interesting people in the world. Another great one. I went through a Tom Merritt rabbit hole.
I could tell, yeah.
And they're all great. I wanted to find one that was at least okay, but no, they're...
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, a word is my retirement plan. I wanted a really easy show. So it's like one where I just need a booker. I don't need to write anything and prepare anything. I mean, I guess you have to prepare for interviews as you just demonstrated, but you don't have to research daily tech topics. I guess that's where I was going. And it really is just me going, I want to talk to that person. Let me talk to him. I feel like you can understand this impulse.
Yeah. I mean, in my podcast, in thinking about like the time, the thing when you start a podcast, right, is like, you don't realize what's going to take the most time, right? Mm-hmm. Which is why, there's 2 million podcasts out there and only 100,000 or whatever number it is that have published recently. The most of them just fade off because it's easy to start it. It's not easy to keep doing it. You gotta, like you said, be extremely passionate about it and really do it. So there were pieces of it that were taking more time. And I was just like, no one's really needs to hear this anyway. I do an interview show, right? Like this. So it's like, get to the interview. Nobody wants me yapping to, they're going to tune in for Tom Merritt. They want to hear Tom Merritt.
They want to hear the conversation. Yeah, right. Absolutely.
And so yeah, stuff like that. I get it. If it can be easier, it can be easier.
It's a half the battle showing up, right?
That's right. Very cool. I loved all these stories. It was so great to chat with you. I thank you so much for spending time with me.
Jeff, thank you for having me. This was really fun talking with you. I appreciate it.
So Tom, where can people find you on the web and the socials?
Sure. TomMerritt.com collects everything together. Of course, DailyTechNewsShow.com if you want to go write the tech news stuff. And on social media, I have a ridiculous username that dates back to 1996 that I sort of refuse to give up. So just search for Tom Merritt. And if you see Ace Detect spelled wrong, that's me. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Mastodon, everywhere.
It's the same with me. Like my Twitter is Big Macher. It was a nickname someone gave me.
Yeah.
And so I had signed up. I didn't use Twitter for 5 years after that. And then once you get verified, now it doesn't matter probably once you have to switch over to Twitter Blue at some point. I'll put the link in the show notes. Everyone, TomMerritt.com is probably your best source. It's got the links to everything, all links to all Tom Merritt stuff, everything we talked about and more.
Indeed.
Because Tom has done so much. He has done so much.
Too much. Thank you, Jeff.
All right. How amazing was Tom Merritt? It was so cool to talk to the guy that I used to get all my tech information from back in the day. And now I get it from him daily on the Daily Tech News Show. Head on over to TomMerritt.com. All the links are in the show notes to all the great things we talked about that he does. Such an amazing content creator and such a great guy. So full of knowledge. All right. Well, with the interview over, that can only mean one thing. I know. Episode 202 2020 is coming to an end. Can't believe it. One more huge thank you to my guest, Tom Merritt, and another huge thank you to all of you for coming back week after week. It means the world to me, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Classic Conversations. If you like what you heard, don't be shy and give us a follow on your favorite podcast app. Also, why not go ahead and tell all your friends about the show? You strike us as the kind of person that people listen to. Thanks in advance for spreading the word, and we'll catch you next time on Classic Conversations.